Is China building a new aircraft carrier? Trump plays hardball with China. And China-Saudi Arabia deal targets the U.S. This is China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This week's China news headlines. Last year, at the request of the U.S. government, Canada arrested Meng Wanzhou, the CFO of Huawei. Huawei is the Chinese telecom company the U.S. has been warning everyone is a national security threat. Meng is accused of violating U.S. sanctions on Iran. And now, after months of waiting, we finally have an update. Meng's extradition trial is set to begin in January 2020. And it could go on for any length of time. That's so unfair. If only the Canadian legal system were more like the Chinese legal system, where a foreigner can be sentenced to death after a quick trial. Satellite photos of a shipyard outside Shanghai show China is building a mysteriously large ship. This photo was published by the Washington-based think tank, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS. You know what? I can look at satellite photos and comment about them too. Doesn't mean I give myself some fancy pants name like the Center for Strategic Looking at Stuff. Here, let me give it a go. Here's a photo from the Gobi Desert. It's a bunch of lines, which could be a secret thing. Fine, here's one from the middle of Kazakhstan. I know what it is. It's a giant pentagram. I have no idea what to make of it though. Okay, this is harder than it looks. According to CSIS, parts of the ship's hull are over 130 feet wide. Experts said while it was difficult to be sure, the size and scale of the new vessel strongly suggested China's much-anticipated new aircraft carrier, referred to as Type 002. And Chinese state-run media has been hinting at it as well. Okay, that's a bit more than a hint. The Chinese Communist Party has been rapidly trying to build up its navy. According to U.S. government reports, in 2 years, the People's Liberation Army Navy added 32 ships. Hopefully China's new aircraft carrier will be better than its last one. I'm just kidding. Hopefully the new one will be a piece of junk too. More on the latest developments in the U.S.-China trade war. This Reuters report suggests China may not have been that serious about making reforms. In each of the 7 chapters of the draft trade deal, China had deleted its commitments to change laws to resolve core complaints that caused the U.S. to launch a trade war: theft of U.S. intellectual property and trade secrets, forced technology transfers, competition policy, access to financial services, and currency manipulation. I know, we're all shocked. Try to breathe. Of course, the Reuters report cites anonymous sources, so we don't know if that's all true. But there have been signs that maybe the trade negotiations aren't going as planned. That's okay though, because the Chinese economy is full of resilience, according to state-run media. Yes, the Chinese economy is chock full of resilience. People are practically tripping over the resilience. Nevertheless, if Trump does increase tariffs, the Chinese Communist Party will take necessary countermeasures. What exactly those countermeasures are is not clear. Hopefully, it's deep introspection, culminating in the realization that it's morally wrong to steal other people's intellectual property. But I won't hold my breath. There's one part of China that's getting a lot of love from the U.S. government: Taiwan. I mean, the Chinese Communist Party considers Taiwan a part of China, so it should be very happy about the new pro-Taiwan bill. Okay, obviously the Chinese regime is freaking out. In the past, similar bills have brought the threat of war. And I mean, the Chinese Communist Party could have an entire fleet of 3 aircraft carriers, some of which might even work properly, so watch out. But here's the real shocker to the story. The bill supporting Taiwan was passed unanimously in the U.S. House of Representatives, as in 414-0. I didn't think that many Democrats and Republicans could ever agree on anything. As I always like to say, the Chinese Communist Party is really bringing America together. But if this bill does spark a war, be warned, the People's Liberation Army fears nothing. That's according to this recent video by state-run People's Daily. Here they are, heroically jumping neck deep into a hole filled with muddy water. Jumping into a hole filled with muddy water? Well, at least they'll be ready for a career in politics. Do you like the Chinese-style model of mass surveillance? Who doesn't? certainly not the city of Darwin, Australia. They're bringing it home. Inspired by the Chinese model, they'll be setting up poles fitted with speakers, cameras, and Wi-Fi. This will allow the Darwin City Council to gain data on how many people walk on what footpaths and where they use certain websites and apps in the city. It's what the residents there have always wanted, a mass surveillance tool in the hands of the government. And finally, are you a fan of the South Korean-made game PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, aka PUBG? I mean, pretending to kill people, what could be more fun? But if you like PUBG, I hope you're not in China, because it's been pulled in favor of a more patriotic game. That more patriotic game is called Elite Force for Peace, or Game for Peace. An expert speaking to Reuters says it's almost exactly the same. The gameplay, the background, the graphic design, and the characters, they're almost the same. Almost. The new game is apparently more socialist and focuses on China's Air Force fighting terrorists. The important part is you're still running around killing people. But in Elite Force for Peace, when you shoot people, they don't bleed, and the dead get up and wave goodbye. Yes, that's what peace is all about. And it just goes to show, there's no foreign intellectual property Chinese companies won't rip off and make into a slightly stupider version. This all happened because Tencent, the Chinese mega company that licensed PUBG, did not get a license renewal from Chinese censors to continue to publish the game. Tencent got angry and tried shooting the censors, but the censors just got back up and waved. And don't go anywhere, because after the break, Trump is playing hardball with China on trade. Welcome back to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. Friday's coming, and you know what that means here at China Uncensored. It's Friday! Friday! Gotta get down on Friday. If you'd like to feel old, that song came out 8 years ago. Anyway, this Friday, you know who might not be partying, yeah? See, for 5 months, US and Chinese negotiators have been trying to work out a big trade deal. Back in December, President Trump had said he would raise tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods on March 1st. He extended that deadline and then kept extending it. So a trade deal could be made. But on Sunday, President Trump said enough is enough. Well, he tweeted enough is enough.
For 10 months, China has been paying tariffs to the USA of 25% on $50 billion of high tech and 10% on $200 billion of other goods. The 10% will go up to 25% on Friday.
Thank goodness Twitter allows up to 240 characters now. So this Friday, 2 days from now, is the deadline. And maybe he means it this time.
The trade deal with China continues, but too slowly as they attempt to renegotiate. No.
This is a change of tone from early April, when Trump met with Vice Premier Liu He in the Oval Office. At that time, it seemed like things were going well.
We are rounding the turn. We'll see what happens. We have a ways to go, but not very far. We've made a lot of progress.
The Chinese vice premier agreed there was progress and tried to butter up the president a little by praising his direct involvement in the negotiations.
Because of your direct involvement, we do have great progress. Although we still have some remainings, but I think hopefully, we get a good result.
Oh, Liu He, flattery will get you everywhere. Except maybe to a trade agreement. So why have the trade negotiations hit a speed bump since then? On Monday, U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, who have been leading the trade talks, said that Chinese officials had been reneging on previous commitments, and they confirmed that U.S. tariffs would be raised on Friday. According to Lighthizer, Chinese officials were trying to make substantial last-minute changes to the agreement. What? Who could have seen this coming? Well, a lot of people, actually. Bloomberg columnist and finance professor Noah Smith says that for China to make good on its promise to reduce its $400 billion a year trade surplus with the U.S., it would have to make big sacrifices. It seems improbable that China will follow through on this big trade war concession, Smith argues. Chances are high that it turns out to be a red herring. That's because following through on any kind of structural reform would hurt China's economic growth too much. But of course, not signing a trade deal would also hurt China's economic growth. That could be why last Friday, Trump suggested that the U.S. would be just fine without a deal.
We'll see what happens over the next couple of weeks, but we're getting close to a very historic, monumental deal, and if it doesn't happen, we'll be fine too, maybe even better.
One reason the U.S. could be better off holding out for now is that these negotiations are a unique chance to reset America's relationship with China. That's what hedge fund manager Kyle Bass recently told CNBC. And there's good reason to listen to Bass. He's one of the few people who correctly predicted the subprime meltdown that sparked the 2008 financial crisis. He says reducing America's $400 billion trade deficit with China is small potatoes compared to the big play, forcing China to stop stealing American technology.
With China, our real issue is forced technology transfer, it's intellectual property theft, it's subversive industrial policies that, let's say, circumvent WTO rules. It's basically the way the Chinese lie, cheat, and steal their way through our economy.
Bass says that for the trade deal to be meaningful, it's got to have teeth, like sanctions on China if their promises turn up empty.
It's really important for this new agreement, whatever it is, to be measurable and punishable.
And that's one of the sticking points with the current deal, which the Chinese officials tried to renege on. But if you ask former White House Chief Strategist Steve Bannon, the U.S. has to demand that the Chinese regime make structural reforms that will transform China into the kind of free market system that China promised to be so many years ago. And if we can't get that from the trade deal, we shouldn't sign it at all.
I think we ought to walk away from this right now. We ought to start playing hardball. We ought to start playing smash mouth.
Yeah, we ought to start playing Smash Mouth.
Hey now, you're an all-star. Get your game on, go play.
If you'd really like to feel old, that song came out 20 years ago. What's that, Shelley? I see. Steve Bannon is not a fan of late 90s rock music, he just meant aggressive and confrontational. That makes more sense, I guess. Anyway, Trump is getting more aggressive and confrontational. His tweets on Sunday were a warning that things are moving too slowly and that Chinese negotiators had better not get overconfident or drag things out. It's time to make a deal, or no deal, if they want to play it like that. And he's gotten support from some unexpected sources, like Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer, who tweeted that Trump should hang tough on China. Meanwhile, Chinese officials have agreed to resume trade talks Thursday and Friday, so there's a possibility that tariffs might not go into effect on Friday after all. Up next, China's trying to become Saudi Arabia's good friend. Let's see how that will turn out. Welcome back to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. Saudi Arabia has been a longtime U.S. ally, sometimes even a close friend. All the way through President Trump, too, though he seems slightly less comfortable with the hand-holding. Now, the story of why the U.S. and Saudi Arabia have been friends is a whole other topic, maybe someday on America Uncovered. But the big news is that the Chinese Communist Party is looking to step in. Chinese leader Xi Jinping wants to tie Saudi Arabia to his Belt and Road Initiative, the trillion-dollar global infrastructure plan supported by a seriously terrible propaganda song. That song is also a virulent strain of earworm. Anyway, the Chinese Communist Party's ultimate goal in improving ties with Saudi Arabia is to become a dominant foreign power in the Middle East. Of course, history has not always been kind to foreign powers in the Middle East, but the Chinese Communist Party probably doesn't know this since it rewrote all the Chinese language history books. I guess nothing happened between 1966 and 1976. Okay, back to Saudi Arabia. It invests heavily in the United States, and it's mainly through the state-owned Saudi Public Investment Fund. It's one of the largest sovereign wealth funds in the Middle East, with about $300 billion in assets. That's a lot of money. Like investing $3.5 billion into Uber was chump change. By 2030, the Saudi Public Investment Fund plans to invest more than $2 trillion worldwide. and a big chunk of that could end up in China. The head of the Saudi fund was in Beijing last month for a forum on Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative. He told CNBC, "This is the first time for me to go out and meet asset managers, companies, Chinese entrepreneurs, and they are really very impressive." And now a spokesman for the fund said they were planning to open a new office in Asia to focus on China. Now wait just a minute. Questionable dealings with Saudi Arabia are supposed to be a U.S. thing. This is just another case of the Communist Party stealing our intellectual property. And they've been working on this for a while. In February, the Saudi Crown Prince met with Xi Jinping in China. They had great things to say about each other. Xi Jinping said the two countries should speed up the signing of an implementation plan on connecting the Belt and Road Initiative with the Saudi Vision 2030. That's Saudi Arabia's own massive economic plan. And the Crown Prince said Saudi Arabia is full of confidence in the bright future of China's development under the leadership of President Xi. That was obviously the right thing to say because the two countries then signed $28 billion in deals. Wait, that gives me an idea. You know, I too am full of confidence in the bright future of China's development under the leadership of President Xi. Can I have $28 billion now? No? How about just enough to pay off my student loans? Okay, how about a tuna fish sandwich? Anyway, that $28 billion was just a continuation of a $65 billion investment and trade deal signed by the Saudi king and Xi Jinping in 2017. It's good to be the king. You can hold hands with every world leader. Many of the Belt and Road projects will include energy grids and ports. There are reasons behind these agreements. China is hungry for oil, especially to fuel the Belt and Road. China gets oil from all over the Middle East and has invested heavily in the region. And that's made China a powerful force, as different countries, including Saudi Arabia, compete for Chinese investment. Now, historically, China has had trouble in the Middle East because they've supported Iran for years. And a lot of other Middle Eastern countries don't like Iran. But the Chinese Communist Party has solved that problem with billions of dollars. Yes, through the Belt and Road, China has become the largest trading partner of the Arab League, including Saudi Arabia as well as Iran. And the Chinese Communist Party could even eventually replace the U.S. as a power in the Middle East. I mean, it's been so fun and easy for the U.S., I can see why China would want a piece of the action. So Saudi Arabia is boosting oil exports to China. And it's helping China build several of its own oil refineries through joint ventures with the Saudi state-run oil company Aramco. Saudi Arabia is also helping build a $10 billion oil refinery in a Chinese-controlled port in Pakistan. That's key Belt and Road real estate right there. These oil deals are important because the latest U.S. sanctions on Iranian oil also apply to China, meaning the Chinese regime either has to defy U.S. sanctions and face the penalty, or it has to find other sources of oil. Though so far, China hasn't reached out to Saudi Arabia for more oil, as far as we know. But to say the China-Saudi relationship is just about oil would be crude. Saudi Arabia is also a strategic location for China's Belt and Road Initiative. It would give China access to the Red Sea through Saudi ports, which means easier access to the Suez Canal and the Mediterranean Sea, where China controls a major port to Europe through Greece. And it's also investing in a key port in Italy. And Saudi Arabia gets more out of this than just a market for oil. It gets an alternative to the United States. Global oil prices are being kept down by increased U.S. shale oil production. And inside the U.S., there's less support for Saudi Arabia, especially over the war in Yemen. However, President Trump vetoed that resolution. Still, Saudi Arabia is looking for new allies. To that end, Saudi schools will now be teaching Mandarin. That decision happened after the $28 billion deal Saudi Arabia and China signed in February, because when you're an absolute monarch, you can just decide those things on the spot. You can also totally sell out the Muslims inside China without public oversight. The Chinese regime has been putting the Uyghurs, a mostly Muslim ethnic minority, into concentration camps and trying to wipe out their language and culture. They call it fighting terrorism and extremism. Well, after that $28 billion deal, the Saudi Crown Prince said China has the right to carry out anti-terrorism and de-extremization work for its national security. And if that involves putting 1 million Uyghur Muslims into Chinese concentration camps, so be it. At least they'll be learning Mandarin. Thanks for watching this episode of China Uncensored. And remember, this show is brought to you thanks to support from viewers who contribute through the crowdfunding website Patreon. Visit patreon.com/China Uncensored to learn more. Once again, I'm your host, Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching China Uncensored.
Viewers have described China Uncensored like The Daily Show, but about China.
In China, something can be illegal, but still in common practice. For example, bribery, or intellectual property theft, or Uber. But you know, there's a common Chinese saying, "La schmaz." What's that, Shelley? Oh, okay. I'm being told no Chinese people ever say that. At the beginning, I was super excited when I got 500 views on an episode, and now the show's grown to about 500,000 subscribers on YouTube. One episode reached 7.9 million people and counting. Ride in luxury to your destination in only double the amount of time it would take you to fly there. Dreams come true. And China is the little engine that could. I'm a little freaked out that that many people have seen my face.
It's kind of ironic that I'm the minority in a show about China. People in the comments, they'll be like, "You're a traitor." I'm being a patriot. This is my way of showing that I love the country that I came from. Matt, Shelley, and I went to the Philippines to disputed waters, the Scarborough Shoal.
China and the Philippines claim the Scarborough Shoal. The Chinese military is asserting its claims in the South China Sea, so there's a dispute.
We had to take a rickety little Filipino fishing boat surrounded by threatening Chinese Coast Guard vessels.
Chris planted the China Uncensored flag, and then we got away with it. Chris, Shelley, our cameraman, and I went to the Waldorf Astoria in New York, hoping to interview the leader of China, Xi Jinping.
Oh, we are being helped. Going to...
What is it, China Uncensored?
China Uncensored, yeah. I don't suppose there's a chance I could use it.
Down the staircase. All right.
The lead security guard followed us out and said we were banned for life from the Waldorf Astoria. Chris Chappell here right outside of Mongkok. Our camera guy is in there right now. He's seen people getting beat by police. Police are trying to tear down the tents. Things are wild now.
People would say things to us like, "My professor plays China Uncensored for our class." To see people really believe in what we were talking about was life-changing for all of us.
One word you would use to describe Chris Chappell.
Committed.
Hilarious.
Engaging. Intriguing.
Have you heard of China Uncensored? Great comedy show. Hey, have you heard of China Uncensored? It's starring me.
It's more and more obvious that China is having a major influence on the U.S.
The way that the U.S. is treating China now, it will start to affect people's lives, and they'll need somewhere to go to learn about that.
Hey, have you heard of China Uncensored? 中国解密. In 5 years, I see China Uncensored as the only show available on TV or the internet. It will be the sole source of edutainment worldwide. Have you heard of China Uncensored?
Yeah, I have.
You actually have? He's heard of China Uncensored.
I love China Uncensored.